The late afternoon sun, a benevolent golden orb, cast long, dancing shadows across the cobblestone streets of downtown Charleston as I made my way to the waterfront. My name is Sylvia Kale, and at 42 years old, I had cultivated a life rooted in principles and quiet observation, a stark contrast to the chaotic currents that often define the hospitality industry, an arena I had recently and deliberately exited. For years, I had navigated the intricate world of upscale hotels and fine dining establishments, not as a server or a chef, but as an operations analyst tasked with streamlining processes and improving guest experiences. What I actually witnessed, however, was a slow, insidious erosion of integrity, where entitlement from the top trickled down, costing honest workers opportunities and frustrating genuine customers. The ocean breeze, thick with the scent of salt and pluff mud, was a familiar comfort. It usually soothed the simmering dissatisfaction I felt about the industry I'd once poured my soul into. But today, a different kind of gust was brewing, a subtle shift in the winds of my personal landscape. I had joined a temporary project team, a curious anomaly in my post-corporate life. My company, a small but reputable consulting firm based here in Charleston, had lent me out to Food Lion, a grocery chain undergoing a massive system-wide overhaul. They called it Wave 4, a strategic initiative to modernize inventory and supply chain logistics across multiple states. My role was to provide insights on efficiency, leveraging my deep understanding of operational flow, even if the product was now pallets of canned goods rather than plates of pan-seared scallops. Our team, a motley crew of 8, was a refreshing change of pace. We were a temporary family forged in the crucible of long hours and endless miles, moving from one remodeled store to the next like a traveling band of retail evangelists. Our current pilgrimage had brought us to Wilmington, North Carolina, a coastal city not unlike my own Charleston, but one that held an unexpected catalyst for a profound shift in my life's trajectory. We had settled into a mid-range hotel just outside the bustling downtown, opting for practicality over luxury. Each evening, after breaking down cardboard boxes and rearranging cereal aisles, our ritual was to seek out a decent meal. Our company was remarkably generous, offering a daily per diem of up to $100 for meals and fuel. This wasn't a free handout, it was reimbursement for actual expenses. The unspoken agreement among our team was that if we didn't spend the full 100 on food, we'd funnel the remainder into tips. It was our way of spreading a little goodwill, a small act of kindness in an often thankless industry. If I spent $25 on a meal, I'd leave $75 in tips, ensuring the server received a truly significant bonus. It was a practice born of a genuine desire to uplift, to acknowledge the often overlooked backbone of the service sector. Each of us, without fail, left tips upward of $50 every single night. We were in essence a server's dream. Our second night in Wilmington led us to a place called the Mariner's Table, a seemingly upscale restaurant and bar conveniently located a mere block from our hotel. The ambience was nautical chic, all polished brass and dark wood with soft jazz murmuring from unseen speakers. It promised an experience. The food, when it arrived, was indeed fantastic. My grilled mahi-mahi, flaky and perfectly seasoned, was a testament to the kitchen's skill. But from the moment our server, a woman in her late 20s with a perpetually bored expression, approached our table, a subtle dissonance began to form. She was abrupt, almost dismissive, barely making eye contact as she took our orders. My observant nature, a trait honed over years of watching human interactions in high-pressure environments, immediately flagged her as less than ideal. Yet I dismissed. Perhaps she was having a bad night, perhaps she was new. My patient side advocated for understanding, for giving her the benefit of the doubt. As our meal concluded and the last morsels of dessert were savored, she dropped 8 individual checks onto our table with a clatter, not even bothering to indicate whose was whose. She simply turned on her heel and walked away. A collective sigh rippled through our small party. Well, that was efficient, Mark, our team lead, quipped dryly, earning a few tired chuckles. We began the usual post-meal dance of comparing checks, deciphering entrees, and matching signatures. That's when the first jolt hit. My eyes, trained to spot anomalies, immediately landed on the tip line of my receipt. A number was already there, bold and uninvited, $6.75. My brow furrowed. I looked at Mark's check, then Sarah's. The same bold, handwritten amount or a close variation adorned each one. And then the highlight, a fluorescent yellow streak across the bottom of the receipt, drawing attention to a small print disclaimer: 15% gratuity added to parties of 10 or more guests. A knot tightened in my stomach, not of anger, not yet, but of a deeply familiar exasperation. Anyone else notice this? I asked, my voice calm despite the rising tension within me. Heads nodded. She wrote in her own tip, Sarah murmured, disbelief coloring her tone, and highlighted the gratuity rule. But we're 8 people, I stated, articulating the obvious. Not 10, there are 8 of us at this table, count them. My finger tapped the table's surface, a silent drumbeat of incredulity. A murmur of agreement ran around the table. Well, I guess she's missing out on our plan, one of my colleagues grumbled, gesturing to his substantial wad of cash earmarked for a truly magnificent tip. The collective mood shifted from pleasant post-meal relaxation to a quiet, principled indignation. We were generous to a fault, but not to be taken for fools. My principled nature bristled. This wasn't just about the money, it was about the presumption, the arrogance, the blatant disregard for honesty in a profession that thrives. It was a microcosm of everything I had grown to resent about a certain segment of the industry: the entitlement, the lack of genuine service, the exploitation of unspoken rules. When our server finally deigned to return, her expression still a blank slate of disinterest, I held up my receipt, my voice steady and even, cut through the low hum of the restaurant. "Excuse me, could you explain this?" I pointed to the handwritten tip and the highlighted text. "We are a party of 8. Your menu clearly states gratuity is added for parties of 10 or more." She barely glanced at the receipt, her eyes flickering over my face with an almost imperceptible sneer. "It's company policy," she recited, a rote response devoid of any genuine engagement. "15% gratuity is added to parties of 10 or more guests." She repeated the line verbatim as if I hadn't just pointed out the glaring discrepancy. "We are 8, I reiterated, my patience beginning to thin. 8 people. Not 10, a flicker of something annoyance, impatience, crossed her face. "Oh well," she waved a dismissive hand, her gaze already drifting to another table. "Just sign the receipt." And with that, she turned to walk away. My blood ran cold. Just sign the receipt? The audacity was breathtaking. This was not a server making a mistake. This was a server actively trying to defraud us, banking on our fatigue, our collective desire to just finish the evening and return to the hotel. It wasn't about the $6.75. It was about the principle. It was about the honest workers being undercut by such blatant greed. It was about the genuine customers being taken advantage of. This was precisely the kind of small yet corrosive incident that had driven me from the industry in the first place. My motivation, a quiet, simmering resolve to fight for better standards, felt a sudden, sharp surge. This wasn't just about me or my team. It was a symptom, a visible ulcer on the face of an industry that needed a reckoning. I pushed back my chair, the scrape of wood against the floor echoing in the sudden silence that had fallen over our table. My team watched me, eyes wide, knowing that when Sylvia Kale stood up like that, something significant was about to happen. I walked purposefully towards the host's stand, my pace measured, my composure unruffled. The young host, barely out of his teens, looked up startled. "Could I speak with a manager, please?" I asked, my voice polite but firm. Moments later, a man in a crisp white shirt and a dark tie approached, his expression practiced in its pleasant neutrality. He looked to be in his late 30s with an air of weary competence. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm David, the night manager." "How can I help you?" I explained the situation concisely and factually, leaving out none of the details: the 8-person party, the menu's 10-person gratuity rule, the handwritten tips, and the server's dismissive attitude. I kept my tone even, devoid of emotional accusation, relying on the sheer absurdity of the facts to make my point. "It's not about the money, David," I concluded, "it's about the principle, and the clear attempt to force a charge that isn't due." David listened intently, his practiced smile fading into a thoughtful frown. "I understand completely, ma'am," he said, his voice surprisingly sincere. "Please allow me a moment to speak with my employee and verify a few things." He gestured to a nearby bench. "Would you mind waiting here for just a moment?" I nodded, my arms crossed over my chest, my gaze steady. I wasn't angry in the explosive sense, but rather a deep, cold disappointment, a feeling of "here we go again." I was patient, I always was, in this situation, while galling required careful handling. This wasn't just about getting my $6 back. This was about exposing a pattern. A few minutes later, the swinging kitchen doors burst open and our server stomped out, apron ripped off, her face a furious mask. She marched straight towards the bar, directly across from where I stood. Her movements were sharp, aggressive, clearly fueled by a righteous indignation of her own, though entirely misplaced. She ducked under the bar, rummaging for her purse. As she straightened up, I caught her eye. She was glaring at me, her mouth a tight, resentful line, and in that moment, a quiet, almost mischievous thought sparked in my mind. It was a fleeting impulse, a tiny rebellion, but it felt exquisitely right. My observant nature had noted her expression, the depth of her entitled rage. My principled core knew that true justice wasn't just about punishment, but about a clear understanding of the consequences of one's actions. "By the way," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet hum of the restaurant, carrying just enough to reach her ears, "I was planning to leave a $60 tip tonight to max out my daily allowance. Each of us, actually." Her eyes, dead and cold, widened infinitesimally. The fury didn't dissipate, but a new emotion, a dawning horror, flickered within them. A sound, a guttural, barely audible whisper escaped her lips. "Fing ahole." Then she snatched her purse, spun on her heel, and stalked out of the restaurant, the glass doors swinging shut behind her with a definitive thud. The sudden silence she left in her wake was profound. David, the manager, reappeared beside me, a grim expression on his face. He hadn't heard her vulgarity, but he had witnessed her abrupt departure. "I apologize, ma'am," he said, his voice laced with genuine regret. "She won't be an issue anymore, and on behalf of the Mariners table, your entire meal tonight, including all beverages, is on us. We truly regret this experience." He handed me a voided receipt showing a zero balance. My team, who had silently watched the entire exchange, looked at me with a mixture of awe and vindication. They weren't just getting a free meal, they saw justice, swift and decisive. We stayed at that hotel for 2 more weeks, and every single night, without exception, we returned to the Mariners table. We were treated like royalty. Every server went above and beyond, and we in turn left astronomical tips. But as I sat there enjoying the impeccable service, a new thought began to take root in my mind. That incident, while seemingly resolved, felt like a single frayed thread in a much larger, tangled tapestry. It wasn't just one bad server, it was indicative of a deeper problem within the industry, a symptom of greed and entitlement that gnawed at its very core. I looked around the bustling restaurant at the other patrons, at the weary faces of the line cooks visible through the kitchen door. My resolve, which had been slowly solidifying over years of witnessing such injustices, was now crystal clear. This was the moment. This single petty betrayal had cemented my unwavering commitment to expose systemic greed within the hospitality industry. I knew with absolute certainty that my journey to fight for better standards had only just begun. The question now was, where did I even start and how deep did this rabbit hole truly go? My principled nature demanded answers, my observational skills would find them, and my patience would be the weapon that brought the truth to light no matter how long it took. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. Act 2. Struggle, the desperation, descent into darkness, and continuous progression. The immediate satisfaction of that night, of seeing David, the manager, take swift action was undeniable. My team and I continued to enjoy excellent service at the Mariners' table for the remainder of our time in Wilmington, a testament to the fact that some establishments could get it right. But the encounter with the entitled server, whom I later learned was indeed Brenda, a manager's niece as the Reddit post implied, had planted a stubborn seed in my mind. It wasn't just about Brenda, it was about the environment that allowed a Brenda to flourish, to feel emboldened enough to attempt such a blatant act of fraud. My principles, finely tuned over years of observing the underbelly of the service industry, told me there was more beneath the surface. My patient nature knew this wouldn't be a quick fix. Upon returning to Charleston, the saltwater air still clinging to my clothes, I found myself unable to shake the incident. My consulting work, while engaging, felt strangely hollow compared to the burgeoning sense of purpose that now consumed me. I began subtly at first to channel my methodical, observant energy into research. The Mariners' Table, I discovered, was not a standalone entity. It was part of a rapidly expanding regional chain called Coastal Flavors Holdings, which boasted a portfolio of 23 restaurants across the Carolinas and Georgia. My initial curiosity widened into a focused investigation. My first attempts were conventional, almost naive in retrospect. I meticulously documented the incident, cross-referencing my experience with online reviews of other Coastal Flavors establishments. It didn't take long to find similar complaints. Forced gratuities for smaller parties, hidden fees, allegations of subpar ingredients disguised as premium. My blood ran cold, a familiar chill of recognition. This wasn't an isolated incident, it was a pattern. This was exactly the kind of systemic rot I had witnessed, the subtle yet pervasive greed that chipped away at the trust between consumer and establishment, worker and employer. I reached out to consumer protection agencies, filing a detailed complaint about the Mariners' Table and Coastal Flavors Holdings. The response was boilerplate, assuring me my complaint was under review. I contacted local labor boards, raising concerns about potential wage discrepancies and the forced gratuities' impact on server tips. Again, the bureaucratic machinery churned slowly, offering little immediate hope. My patience was being tested, but my principled resolve only deepened. The system, it seemed, was designed to protect itself, not the individual. This led me down a different path, one that leveraged my unique background. As an operations analyst, I had built an extensive network within the hospitality world. I started making calls discreetly at first to former colleagues, industry veterans, and even some disgruntled ex-employees I knew from various hotel and restaurant groups. I framed my inquiries carefully, mentioning I was researching a book on industry best practices or a white paper on customer relations. My observational skills allowed me to pick up on subtle cues, hushed tones, and pregnant pauses that spoke volumes. What I uncovered was far more disturbing than a simple tip-skimming waitress. Coastal Flavors Holdings, I learned, was owned by a private equity firm, Prosperity Capital Group, notorious for its aggressive acquisition strategies and its ruthless focus on maximizing profit margins at all costs. Their CEO, a man named Sterling Vance, was a shadowy figure, rarely seen in public but whispered about in boardrooms as a financial titan who viewed people as mere numbers on a spreadsheet. The stories began to trickle in, then pour. Former chefs spoke of being forced to use cheaper, industrial-grade ingredients while charging premium prices. Servers recounted tales of unexplained deductions from their paychecks, of being pressured to upsell, and of the gratuity for 10 or more policy being selectively applied, often to vulnerable or less observant customers. Many feared retaliation, too dependent on their jobs to speak out publicly. One former regional manager, a man named Arthur Hayes, who had worked for Coastal Flavors for a decade before being unceremoniously laid off, agreed to meet me for coffee in a quiet corner of a Charleston cafe. He looked gaunt, his eyes hollowed by stress. "Sylvia," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "you're digging in a dangerous place. Prosperity Capital doesn't play by the rules." He spoke of a culture of fear, of targets set so impossibly high that managers were forced to cut corners, to look the other way, or to actively participate in deceptive practices. He confirmed the widespread nature of the forced gratuity scam, revealing it was a directive from corporate, not a rogue server. They'd call it a revenue enhancement initiative, he scoffed, bitterness etched on his face. Said it was to compensate for operational inefficiencies. It was theft, pure and simple. They were skimming pennies off every check, and it added up to millions. My stomach churned. This was far worse than Brenda. This was a systematic, corporate-sanctioned fraud designed to exploit both customers and, indirectly, their own employees who were robbed of their rightful tips. Arthur provided me with tantalizing yet unverified internal documents he had managed to squirrel away before his termination, internal memos about optimizing revenue streams, vague references to unaccounted gratuities, and a list of shell corporations used for obscure financial transactions. It was a goldmine of clues, but not yet a smoking gun. My life began to transform. My mornings, once filled with consulting projects, were now consumed by researching corporate structures, auditing laws, and whistleblower protections. My evenings were spent sifting through digital archives, cross-referencing names and addresses, attempting to connect the dots between Prosperity Capital Group, their numerous shell companies, and the alleged illicit practices. My patience was a double-edged sword. It allowed me to delve deep, but it also meant the frustration of slow progress weighed heavily. I felt the emotional toll begin to mount. The outrage I felt was no longer just about a small tip, it was about the vast network of deceit and exploitation. I saw the faces of the underpaid dishwashers, the overworked servers, the trusting customers, and their struggles fueled my fire. There were nights I barely slept, haunted by the stories I heard, by the sheer audacity of Sterling Vance and his cohorts. I started noticing things around me, even in my peaceful Charleston life, that reminded me of the pervasive greed, the forced smile of a valet, the exhausted eyes of a hotel housekeeper. It felt like the world was suddenly painted in shades of cynical manipulation. My initial attempts to expose them hit walls. I leaked some of Arthur's documents to a local investigative journalist. She was interested, but without a source willing to go on record or irrefutable, undeniable evidence, it was too risky for her paper to publish. They'd sue us into oblivion, Sylvia, she'd explained kindly. Unless you have something that can't be disputed, something that points directly to Vance, it's a non-starter. This was a major setback, a significant point of despair. I had hoped that revealing even a fraction of the truth would spark an investigation. Instead, I was met with caution and fear. It was then I realized that my fight couldn't be fought through traditional channels alone. They were too well protected, too powerful, their legal teams too formidable. I felt a surge of helplessness. How could one person, a former operations analyst, stand against a multi-million-dollar empire built on deceit? My principled approach had led me to roadblocks. My patience, once a strength, now felt like a burden, stretching out a conflict that seemed impossible to win. The frustration pushed me to a new level of desperation. I started spending time in Washington, D.C., using my savings to attend industry conferences, not to network for my consulting firm, but to quietly observe, to listen, to gauge the mood. I learned that Prosperity Capital Group was preparing for a massive IPO, aiming to take Coastal Flavors Holdings public. This was their big play, their chance to multiply their ill-gotten gains exponentially. This IPO, I realized, was their Achilles heel. If I could expose their malpractices before the IPO, the fallout would be catastrophic. The stakes escalated dramatically. This wasn't just about justice for a few, it was about stopping a massive, fraudulent enterprise before it could ensnare thousands more investors and customers. My apartment in Charleston became a war room. Corkboards covered with timelines, photographs, and complex organizational charts. My laptop glowed late into the night. I learned basic digital forensics, how to trace IP addresses, how to uncover hidden metadata in documents. My observational skills became less about human behavior and more about digital footprints. I started taking calculated risks, infiltrating industry forums with burner accounts, posing as an aspiring restaurant owner, subtly probing for more information. One terrifying night, I received an anonymous email. It contained a single image, a blurry photo of my apartment building. The message read, "You're getting too close, Sylvia, back off." My heart pounded against my ribs. They knew, Prosperity Capital knew I was investigating them. The sense of helplessness I'd felt before transformed into a primal fear. Was I truly safe? My principled fight had put me in grave danger. My patient approach had given them time to find me. My consuming anger was now tinged with a cold dread. This was my rock bottom. I was isolated, my savings dwindling, my safety compromised. The weight of the world felt like it was pressing down on me. I considered stopping, retreating, going back to a quiet life, burying my head in the sand. But then I thought of Brenda's sneer, of Arthur's hollow eyes, of the countless unknown faces exploited by this company. My motivation, the very core of my being, flared brightly in the darkness. I was principled, I couldn't abandon this fight. I was observant, I knew how to find the weak points. I was patient, I knew how to wait for the perfect strike. I wouldn't just expose them, I would dismantle them. I would make sure Sterling Vance and his entire operation crumbled, and that their downfall served as a stark warning to others in the industry. It wouldn't be a public shaming, it would be a systemic collapse. I needed definitive proof, something irrefutable that even their high-powered lawyers couldn't dispute. I needed to hit them where it truly hurt, their carefully constructed financial empire. The image of my apartment wasn't a deterrent. It was the final brutal shove that propelled me from desperation into unwavering, meticulous resolve. The battle had just begun, and this time I wouldn't be pulling any punches. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily #Act 3. Revenge the Reckoning, its execution, and the grand payoff, the email with its chilling photograph of my apartment building, was a visceral punch to the gut. For a moment, a fleeting, terrifying moment, I considered giving up. The fear was a cold, constricting hand around my throat, but then as quickly as it came, it receded, replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated fury. This wasn't just about greed anymore, it was about intimidation, about silencing the truth. And Sylvia Kale, principled to her core, would not be silenced. My rock bottom had become my launching pad. The transformation was profound, a hardening of resolve forged in the crucible of fear and righteous anger. My patience, once a quiet virtue, became a strategic weapon. My observational skills, once applied to customer service patterns, now focused with laser precision on the intricate web of corporate deceit. And my principles, the unwavering moral compass that guided me, dictated that this revenge would not be petty or destructive for its own sake, but a surgical strike aimed at systemic change. I would not simply expose them, I would dismantle their financial house of cards, making sure the consequences rippled throughout the industry as a deterrent. I retreated deeper into my work, disconnecting from almost all social contact, my life narrowing to a single, consuming obsession. The first hurdle was to understand how they knew I was investigating them. My digital footprint was meticulously clean. The only way was through my confidential contact, Arthur Hayes. My heart sank. Had he been compromised, I set up a secure, encrypted line of communication and reached out to him. His voice, when he finally answered, was a thin, reedy whisper. He was terrified. "They know, Sylvia," he choked out. "They know I talked to you. They froze my accounts, threatened my family. They know everything." He confessed that he had used his personal email, unknowingly infected with spyware, to send me some of the initial documents. Prosperity Capital had been monitoring him for months, ever since his termination. They hadn't needed to infiltrate my systems, they'd simply monitored his, watching every email he sent, every attachment. They had been watching me since the beginning. The revelation was a bitter pill, but also a crucial piece of the puzzle. It meant they weren't omniscient, they had merely found an entry point. This knowledge, coupled with my patient approach, gave me an advantage. They knew I was a nuisance, perhaps an irritant, but they didn't know the depth of my resolve or the meticulousness of my plan. They assumed I was just another disgruntled former employee or a naive consumer advocate. They underestimated me. That would be their gravest mistake. My target was Sterling Vance, the elusive CEO of Prosperity Capital Group, and his upcoming IPO for Coastal Flavors Holdings. The IPO was scheduled for exactly 3 months from that terrifying email. That gave me 3 months to gather irrefutable evidence that would not just embarrass them, but trigger regulatory investigations, investor flight, and a cascade of legal actions that would bring their empire to its knees. My research shifted from broad industry patterns to pinpointing financial irregularities. Arthur's leaked documents, though compromised, provided the breadcrumbs. They referenced a specific obscure auditing firm, Apex Ledger Solutions, which handled all of Prosperity Capital's subsidiaries. My observant nature clicked. Why such an unknown firm for such a large operation? I dug deeper. Apex Ledger Solutions was small, almost unheard of, with a digital presence barely beyond a placeholder website. A quick check revealed its primary address was a P.O. box in a strip mall in rural Georgia, far from any financial hub. This reeked of a shell operation. My principled approach dictated that I needed irrefutable proof of fraudulent accounting, not just suspicion. I needed to infiltrate Apex Ledger Solutions. This was the daring, deeply satisfying move for revenge that my soul craved. It was audacious, risky, but potentially devastating. The first step was digital reconnaissance. I spent weeks attempting to breach their limited online presence, trying every known vulnerability, every social engineering trick I knew. Nothing. Their cybersecurity, despite their small profile, was surprisingly robust. It became clear that a direct digital attack was too risky and likely to fail. I needed a different approach. My plan began to crystallize, leveraging my key traits: patience. I would not rush. I would wait for the perfect opportunity. Observant, I would find their physical weaknesses. Principled, the information had to be obtained ethically without breaking laws that could jeopardize my own freedom. This meant no direct hacking, no planting malware. I needed a human element. I discovered that Apex Ledger Solutions had only two known employees listed on public records: a managing partner, a man named Marcus Thorne, and his assistant, a young woman named Emily Vance. Emily Vance. The last name jolted me. Could she be related to Sterling Vance, the CEO? My heart pounded. This was a critical lead. I began to stalk Emily Vance, not in a predatory way, but in the meticulous, observant manner of an intelligence operative. Social media, public records, professional profiles. I learned she was Sterling Vance's estranged niece, barely scraping by, working for her uncle's dodgy accounting firm. She seemed resentful, trapped. She lived in a small apartment complex on the outskirts of Atlanta. She frequented a specific coffee shop every morning. She drove an old, beat-up sedan. She was, I realized, my entry point. She represented the disillusioned workers. My motivation compelled me to protect. My plan began. I booked a flight to Atlanta. I rented a nondescript car. My heart hammered with a mixture of fear and exhilarating purpose. This was it, the point of no return. For a week, I observed Emily. I watched her at the coffee shop, at her apartment, at her office building, a small, unmarked suite in a forgotten office park. I noted her habits, her expressions, the way she clutched her worn purse. She looked defeated, constantly on edge. My observational skills allowed me to pick up on her subtle cues of distress and financial strain. My principled nature wrestled with this. Was manipulating someone, even for a righteous cause, truly just? I rationalized that I wasn't manipulating her for personal gain, but for a greater good to expose her uncle's criminal enterprise. I would offer her an escape, a path to redemption, not just exploit her. One rainy Tuesday morning, as Emily sat alone at a corner table in the coffee shop, staring blankly at her laptop, I made my move. I approached her table, a steaming mug of black coffee in my hand. "Excuse me," I said, my voice soft, almost apologetic. "Couldn't help but notice you're using a very old version of accounting software. I used to work with it for years." She looked up, startled, her eyes guarded. "Oh yeah, it's a bit antiquated. Tell me about it." I smiled warmly, a genuine, empathetic smile. "I'm Sylvia, by the way." I extended my hand. She hesitated, then shook it. "Emily." We fell into conversation, ostensibly about accounting software, but I skillfully steered it to work-life balance, to the pressures of the industry. I spoke of my own disillusionment with corporate greed, about witnessing honest people being exploited. My words resonated with her, unlocking a torrent of suppressed frustration. She spoke of her uncle Sterling without naming him directly, but the veiled references were clear. She spoke of being forced to make adjustments, to massage the numbers, to shred documents she knew were important. She was clearly under immense pressure, teetering on the edge of a breakdown. My observational skills confirmed her internal turmoil. My principled nature knew this was not an opportunity to exploit, but to offer a lifeline. "Emily," I said, my voice low and earnest, "I'm not here by accident. I've been investigating Coastal Flavors Holdings and Prosperity Capital Group. I know about the forced gratuities, the fake invoices, the wage theft, and I know your uncle is behind it all." Her face went ashen. She tried to deny it, but her eyes betrayed her. "How do you know?" "I'm a former operations analyst," I explained, keeping my voice calm and reassuring. "I've seen this pattern before. I understand the pressure you're under, but what you're doing, what they're making you do, it's illegal, and when it all comes crashing down, you'll be an accessory." She broke, tears streamed down her face. She confessed everything: the fear, the coercion, the sheer volume of fraudulent transactions. She admitted she had a panic drive, a hidden external hard drive where she had secretly copied every single fraudulent ledger, every doctored invoice, every damning email as a form of insurance, a desperate plea for justice she was too afraid to make herself. She knew the company was going public, and she was terrified of what that meant for her if the truth ever came out. This was the grand payoff I had been seeking, delivered not through force, but through empathetic understanding, patience, and a shared moral compass. My heart ached for her, for the burden she carried. This wasn't just about my revenge, it was about her vindication, her chance at freedom. "I can help you, Emily," I said, looking her directly in the eye, "but you have to trust me, you have to be willing to do what's right." What followed was 2 weeks of meticulous planning. My patient nature was pushed to its limits, but the stakes were too high to falter. Emily, fragile but resolute, became my key insider. She agreed to provide me with a copy of her panic drive under the condition that her involvement remained absolutely confidential. I promised her full anonymity and, crucially, a path to whistleblower protection once the dust settled. My principled promise weighed heavily, as I knew the risks she was taking were immense. The hard drive contained a treasure trove: internal memos detailing the revenue enhancement initiatives, explicit instructions from Sterling Vance to inflate gratuities for small parties, shell company invoices for services never rendered, and digital trails linking Prosperity Capital Group directly to the fraudulent practices. The evidence was undeniable, the kind that would send corporate lawyers scrambling and regulators roaring. The execution of the revenge had to be precise, timed perfectly to coincide with the IPO's final days, when investor confidence was at its peak and the slightest tremor could cause an earthquake. My plan had multiple layers designed to create maximum impact and ensure the information could not be suppressed. Phase 1, the leak. I bypassed traditional media. I couldn't risk a paper getting cold feet. Instead, I established anonymous accounts on multiple financial news platforms, investor forums, and a prominent online investigative journalism collective known for its deep dives into corporate malfeasance. Using burner phones and VPNs, I uploaded the meticulously organized, time-stamped, and unalterable data from Emily's drive. I focused on specific revelations: the systematic forced gratuities, the blatant wage theft from servers through administrative fees, and the network of shell companies used to launder funds and inflate asset values. My principled approach dictated that this information be presented factually, allowing the evidence to speak for itself. Phase 2, the regulatory strike. Simultaneously, I sent comprehensive, evidence-backed dossiers to the Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC), the Department of Labor, and the Internal Revenue Service. These packages contain the same data but organized for legal and financial auditors, complete with detailed explanations of the fraud. I included an anonymous tip about Emily's willingness to cooperate as a protected whistleblower, ensuring they had a human key to unlock the data without revealing her name up front. Phase 3, the public uproar. The final, most public strike involved social media. I crafted a series of concise, impactful infographics using the most damning pieces of evidence: screenshots of internal directives about forced tips, charts showing the discrepancy between claimed and actual revenue. These were linked to the larger data dumps on the investigative platforms. I scheduled them to go live within minutes of each other, creating a sudden, overwhelming wave of information. The message was simple: Coastal Flavors Holdings built on theft. The day of the IPO, I was back in Charleston, watching the news unfold from my quiet apartment. My heart hammered, not from fear, but from the electric anticipation of a storm about to break. The stock market opened. For a brief, agonizing hour, nothing. Then a single, cryptic tweet from an influential financial blogger referencing disturbing allegations against Coastal Flavors Holdings. Within minutes, the first financial news outlet picked up the story, citing unverified but highly detailed documents released on the web. Then came the dominoes. The SEC announced an urgent inquiry into Coastal Flavors Holdings. The Department of Labor launched an investigation into widespread labor abuses. News anchors, their faces grim, reported on the unprecedented data dump revealing corporate fraud on a massive scale. The stock price of Coastal Flavors, which had just begun trading, plummeted, shedding billions in market capitalization within hours. Investor confidence evaporated. The IPO was a catastrophic failure. The grand payoff was more satisfying than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't about the $6.75 anymore. It was about seeing a predatory system crumble. It was about knowing that countless honest workers would now have a chance at fair wages, and countless consumers would be protected from fraudulent practices. My vengeance was not just personal, it was systemic. Sterling Vance, the untouchable CEO, was seen on the news, his face contorted in a rare display of public panic. His carefully constructed empire was collapsing, exposed by the very greed he had cultivated. Reports soon surfaced that he was under investigation for wire fraud, tax evasion, and multiple counts of corporate malfeasance. The irony was sweet. The man who built his fortune on hidden charges was now facing charges of his own. The long-term consequences were far-reaching. Coastal Flavors Holdings, stripped of its integrity and its capital, eventually filed for bankruptcy, unable to recover from the public outcry and the legal onslaught. Other companies, fearing similar exposure, began to review their own revenue enhancement initiatives. The ripples spread. Emily, through my careful guidance and the assistance of a nonprofit whistleblower advocacy group, secured protection and was instrumental in providing direct testimony against her uncle, eventually leading to his indictment. She began a new life, free from the shadow of her family's crimes. My own life, though forever changed, settled into a new kind of peace. The burning anger had subsided, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph and vindication. I still worked as a consultant, but now I specialized in corporate ethics and transparency, helping companies implement fair practices, ensuring honest workers weren't exploited. The sting of Brenda's forced tip, the initial catalyst, was now a distant memory, a small spark that had ignited a much larger fire. Justice had been served not just for me, but for the countless others who had suffered in silence. There was a final, surprising twist to the saga. Months after the dust settled, I received an anonymous package. Inside was a single, crisp $100 bill tucked into a small, handwritten note. The note simply read, "For Brenda, David." It was from David, the manager at the Mariners table. He hadn't just fired her, he had kept track of the situation and in his own quiet way recognized the deeper injustice. He hadn't been a part of the systemic greed, merely a manager doing his best. His note confirmed that even small acts of decency could ripple outward, a quiet promise that there were still good people in the industry, people willing to acknowledge past wrongs. My revenge hadn't just brought down a corrupt empire, it had, in unexpected ways, sparked tiny flames of integrity in its wake. It was a bittersweet resolution, knowing the journey had been long and costly, but the destination, true justice, was worth every step. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily.